Welcome to your deep dive. We're going deep on military strategy today, really breaking down a giant in the field, Carl von Clausewitz.
A giant, absolutely.
And we're zeroing in on chapter 1 of his big one, his magnum opus, On War.
It's a good place to start.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, we know you face these concepts every day out in the field, even if you haven't had a chance to dig into the book itself.
Right, it's kind of unavoidable.
Clausewitz just had that effect,
Mm-hmm.
His insights, they just have a way of echoing through time. He was writing back in the 19th century.
19th century, yeah.
But it's scary how much of what he saw in warfare is still very relevant today.
Absolutely, that's why we're still talking about him.
Exactly. And to help us unpack this first chapter, connect those dots between then and now, we have our expert in all things strategy.
Glad to be here. Clausewitz always sparks a good conversation. Always makes you think.
Now, chapter 1, it's like it tries to trick you at first. It seems simple. Clausewitz, he's just setting the stage, right?
Setting the stage, yeah, laying out his goals.
Laying out what he wants to do with this whole book. He wants to find a way to understand war, but not just any way, a practical way, a clear way.
Which is a tall order for anyone.
Especially for someone who's worn the uniform, right?
Absolutely.
They know it's not simple.
Not at all, no.
But then, bam, right out of the gate, Clausewitz hits us with this contradiction.
Yes. He does that, doesn't he? He loves a good contrast.
He does.
He's really highlighting how some military leaders, how easily they can talk about war, as if it's as easy as just, using more force than the other side.
Right, like it's a simple numbers game.
Exactly. But then he contrasts that with the insane complexity of what actually happens on the ground.
Out there in the thick of it, yeah. He even uses this incredibly powerful image, talks about the government and management of this ponderous machine with its 100,000 limbs.
Oh, I love that quote.
Isn't it something? It really paints a picture. And that's Clausewitz describing war, the entire war machine. And he's saying some commanders, they treat this crazy, complex system like it's as simple as moving their arm or leg.
It really underscores just how much those leaders are missing. And that takes us to this really important point, which is the danger of oversimplification.
100%.
Clausewitz, he knew how easy it is for theory to float off into the clouds, to become, too abstract, too disconnected from what's actually happening on the battlefield.
It can't just be something you learn in a book, right?
Exactly.
It has to be grounded in reality.
It has to be. And that's why Clausewitz isn't about giving us a rule book. He's actually pushing back against that whole idea.
So he's not trying to tell us exactly what to do in every situation.
No. He's doing something much more valuable, I think. He's equipping us, as military minds with something way more important. Critical thinking skills.
He wants us to think for ourselves.
Yes, exactly. He's giving us the tools to analyze any conflict, to figure out what's really driving it, cut through all the noise, and find the best course of action.
So if theory isn't about memorizing rules, what is it actually good for? How did Clausewitz see its purpose?
Well, he lays out a few key roles, and they're good ones. He says, and I love this image, that theory should throw a clear light on the massive objects, that the mind may the easier find its bearings.
It's like having a compass when you're lost in the fog of war, right?
Mm-hmm.
It helps you orient yourself.
Exactly, you got it. He also says theory should pull up the weeds which error has sown broadcast. So it helps us spot and get rid of all those preconceived notions, those biases, those bad ideas about warfare that can lead to, some really bad outcomes.
So those weeds could be anything from using outdated tactics to completely underestimating your opponent's willingness to fight.
Absolutely. Anything that gets in the way of clear thinking, that's a weed that needs pulling. But, perhaps most importantly, he says theory should show the relations of things to each other, separate the important from the trifling.
Okay, break that down for us a little bit.
He's talking about understanding how all the different parts of war, they all connect. It's not enough to just know the pieces. You have to know how they all work together, how a change in one area can impact everything else.
Because it's a system.
It is a complex, dynamic system.
And you can't just pull one lever without affecting the whole thing.
Exactly. You got it.
It's like that old saying, for want of a nail, one small thing throws off the whole plan.
Exactly. And anyone who's served, they get this. War, it's anything but a straight line.
Right.
You've got so many things in motion, and they can all change in the blink of an eye.
Absolutely. Which brings us right back to Clausewitz's point about how everything's connected.
It's crucial, that understanding. He's saying, look beyond just the tactics.
Beyond just moving troops around, the technology you have.
Right, right. Think about the whole strategic environment.
It's about understanding the why, isn't it? Not just what's happening on some map, but the deeper reasons.
Exactly. Why this conflict? Why now? What are the motivations?
The politics, the economics, even the history behind it all.
All of it. He wants us to dig deep. Ask ourselves, what's at the root of this conflict? And how will that affect what the enemy does? How committed will they be?
How far are they willing to go?
Exactly, because like we were saying, war isn't some abstract game. It's not chess.
And it's easy to forget that sometimes.
It is, it is. But Clausewitz, he's reminding us that there are real lives at stake, political realities, economic factors. It's all woven together in war.
It's human.
Yes. And that leads us to one of his most famous concepts, friction.
Friction.
Right.
What did he mean by that again? It's been a while since I read Clausewitz.
He's talking about how in war, nothing ever goes exactly to plan. There's always something. Delays, unexpected challenges, and of course, good old human error.
It's like when the map you're using doesn't actually match the terrain.
Perfect example. And those are the moments that really test a commander,
When you have to think on your feet.
Exactly. When you have to adapt, make decisions with only part of the information. That's where it really matters.
Which takes us right back to what we were talking about with theory.
About it being a guide, not a set of rules.
Right, because if you're stuck on following a plan perfectly and something unexpected pops up.
You're done. You have to be able to adapt.
And that's even more true today, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Think about how much warfare has changed, even since Clausewitz was writing.
I mean, it's mind-blowing. From muskets and cannons to
To cyber warfare,
Yeah.
drones, AI, the whole thing's different.
So how do Clausewitz's ideas, which came from a very different kind of battlefield, how do they hold up now?
That's what makes him so brilliant, honestly. He might not have predicted the specifics of how we fight wars now, but he understood something deeper.
The nature of war itself.
Yes, that clash of wills, that mix of violence and passion and logic, that hasn't changed.
So he gives us this framework we can still use no matter the technology.
Exactly. He stresses adaptability, understanding your enemy's motivations, anticipating friction. Those are timeless principles, as relevant in the 21st century as they were back then.
So we're not just talking about battlefield tactics here. We're talking about this whole other level.
Absolutely. The human element, the psychology of conflict.
You have to factor that in, just like you would any weapon system.
If not more so. It really is. Clausewitz, he was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. He understood that war, it's not just about armies clashing, it's about wills clashing.
It's battle for the mind, too.
Absolutely, yeah. You're trying to break their will, gain that psychological edge. It's just as important as controlling any territory.
So it's not enough to just have the best tech, the best weapons. You have to know how to use them to influence your opponent's thinking.
Exactly. You got to play the mental game, too. Anticipate what they'll do, exploit their weaknesses, and just as importantly, you got to keep your own forces motivated.
Keep their morale up, especially when things get tough.
Especially then. And this is where Clausewitz's idea of the culminating point of victory comes in, which I think is so insightful.
Remind me about that one.
He says there's a point in any campaign, any battle even, where if you keep pushing, even if you're winning, you can actually weaken your overall position.
So you can push too far, even when it seems like you're on a roll.
Right. You have to know your limits, consolidate what you've gained, and not get greedy. Overreach is a real danger.
Which goes back to what we were saying before about adaptability and good judgment.
Yeah.
You need to know when to hold back, when to change your approach based on what's happening on the ground.
Exactly. Exactly. And that means really understanding not just your own side, but the enemy too. Their strengths, their weaknesses, what their goals are.
You have to get inside their heads a little bit.
You
right?
do. Why are they fighting? What are their cultural sensitivities? What might make them give up or fight even harder?
It's about seeing the battlefield through their eyes as much as your own.
100%. Because, when you really think about it, war, it's a kind of conversation.
A conversation.
A very dangerous and destructive one, for sure. But like any conversation, it only works if both sides are listening and responding to each other.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. As we wrap up our look at Chapter 1 of On War, is there one main takeaway, something that really stands out as relevant for those on the ground today, dealing with all the complexities of modern warfare?
If I had to pick just one thing, it would be Clausewitz's emphasis on always learning, always questioning, always thinking critically. He knew that the study of war, it never really ends.
It's not something you just master and then you're good. It's a lifelong process.
It is, it is. It's about constantly challenging what you think you know, being open to new ideas, new information. The world's changing so fast, you can't afford to be rigid in your thinking.
And that's true on the battlefield and probably in life in general.
Probably, yeah.
Right.
But especially in war. Because in that environment, the most dangerous enemy you can face is often your own rigid thinking.
That's something to think about. Thanks for diving into Clausewitz with us today. It's been enlightening.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk strategy.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us on this deep dive into the mind of Carl von Clausewitz. We'll be back again soon to unpack more of his enduring insights on the nature of war. Until then, stay safe and stay engaged.